Hey friends, welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. If you've come here because you've mostly seen my Marvel Snap, Magic the Gathering or Pokemon content, you might not know that I am a full-time game designer. A lot of the stuff I just do on the side to keep the YouTube channel going. But one of the games I played recently that I really like is Root. And one of the pieces of content that I did earlier was creating custom cards for Marvel Snap. And running along the lines of that idea of creating custom content for games that already exist that I enjoy, I thought, why don't I try and create a faction for the game Root? Now, Root is an asymmetric board game that does now have a Steam adaptation, where each of the players has their own goals, but they can still battle with other players in the same way. But how they usually get victory points is unique, and that's why it is an asymmetric board game. And I wanted to create a whole new faction to just, well, see if I could do it, but also see if I could understand the game enough to build something that would fit nicely alongside the other things that exist, and understand the different parts that it would take to the requirements to build something. Like if you're making a card for a card game, it's a bit different than making a whole set of cards or a whole faction. But if you're making a card for a card game, you need like its cost, its power or toughness or whatever, and then its effect, right? In this, I had to build what the sequence of things is that you can do on your turn, how things costed, how do the different victory points work and how they're scored, and all this kind of stuff that we're going to get right into. But first up, we're going to reveal the faction, which is Owls. I really wanted to do something with owls and constellations because there's 3 phases on a turn, which is kind of like morning, midday, and evening. It's called Birdsong, Daylight, and Evening. And I wanted something that kind of thematically fit into that. And owls are interesting with this because they are nocturnal. They tend to sleep during the day and be awake at night. And I wanted to build something into that. And one of the main things that we're going to see and we're going to work with here are constellation cards. So this is my very shoddy mock-up of what a constellation card would look like, but it follows the recipe of this with 3 key things. The first one, as you can see, is a fox with a dash and then a mouse. This is the icons that use in the game. And there's suits that show up in the cards, and there's suits that show up in the clearings. And what this is a fox clearing that is connected via path to a mouse clearing. Now, if you have, let's go and have a look at the board quickly. And so here's an example of the board, and you can see up here, just above me, is a mouse clearing, and then at the top left is a fox clearing. So that path is the specific path connection that we are talking about here. We'll come back for a second. And so that's one key item. And the next one is a rabbit one connected to a fox one, and then a solitary rabbit one. Now, these constellation cards do 2 things. First, they determine what your setup is, and then how you're going to score points later on, and they kind of cycle around. So we'll skip first to the setup. So that's the board, and then here's the setup. So at the start, you will get one of these constellation cards at random out of your unique constellation deck, and that will determine what your setup is for the game. And so here's an example setup. We've got our fox mouse clearing, as you can see, and a blockade in the middle. Now the blockade is the unique owl ability, so to say, where other factions cannot cross a blockade, with the exception of the Vagabond. But if the Vagabond is hostile to the owls, then no, it cannot cross the blockade. And your goal as the owls is to make lots of blockades. And owls can move freely across blockades. It doesn't cost actions. But the idea is to have to defend both sides. And so in the setup here, you would basically put down 2 blockades, and then you would put 2 owls on each side of the blockade in the marked clearings. So as you can see in the bottom right, we've got a rabbit clearing and then a fox clearing, which has, the fox clearing has 4 because that is the key node from 2 different blockades. And then a solitary owl up in the top left for that lone rabbit clearing. So this is what the setup would look like, and you would start off with 2 blockades. This one in particular I just picked off to one side because it was easier for me to put the edit in. But the blockades would be like probably wooden pieces, kind of like, imagine if like the wooden roads from Settlers of Catan or something like that. And your goal is to defend the blockades and try and set up more blockades. And then there's another key mechanic. So on top of blockades, you get another key mechanic for the owls, which is awake and asleep. So you will have both rested owls and awake owls. At the start of your turn, at the start of the day, all the owls become rested. So their meeple would be lying down. So you would have them all lying flat, and they're defenseless because they're asleep. But you can pay resources to wake up the owls, and then they kind of work like sentries and allow you to perform combat, which is something that I thought would be kind of interesting. It also means that you know exactly like when, like if you move into a space, you know exactly when a combat is going to happen. And so I thought that would be interesting strategically. So we're going to run through the three different phases so we can see exactly how all of this stuff works on your turn. The first one is Birdsong. So you rest all of your owls by laying them down. And then you'll draw a bunch of cards per the card draw symbol. This is all just game assets that I ripped from taking photos of the board, but I wanted to make it feel as close to what it would potentially look like so you could understand as easy as possible. But Birdsong is kind of like Upkeep, which happens in a lot of different factions, kind of have something similar. Like for the cat, you would just get wood for your different sawmills. This one, all you guys go to sleep. Then you have Daylight. So Daylight is where the bulk of the things happen. So the first thing is during Daylight, you have X+1 actions, where X is the number of blockades. And you start with 2 blockades, so most of the time you'll have 3 or more actions, but if your blockades are destroyed, you will have less actions. But you'll never have 0. You'll have always at least 1. And here are the actions that you can do. So you can recruit, place a resting owl at a clearing adjacent to a blockaded path. Move, so you can move any number of awake owls 1 space, but blockades count as no movement cost. So if you're doing a move action, you could move your owls through any number of blockades before having to move, paying the 1 action. You can attack, you can build a blockade, but you can only build the blockade if you rule the clearings on both sides. Now, ruling a clearing, for those that haven't played Root, is having a majority of meeples in a space, more than everyone else. So you would have to have a majority in a clearing on both sides of the path to put a blockade across the path. But you also have to discard a card matching the 2 clearing types. So if you're making a fox rabbit blockade, you'd have to discard 2 cards, 1 fox card, 1 rabbit card. You can then wake an owl. You may perform this action for free by discarding a card that matches the clearing type. Now, awake owls have this special sentry function, where an awake owl, if an enemy faction warrior moves into a clearing with an awake owl, you may discard a card matching the clearing's suit to automatically remove 1 warrior, then rest all owls in that clearing. So that is before any combat happens, kind of like an ambush. So any card in your hand can kind of act like an ambush, but then you rest all of the owls, so you can't do it more than 1 time. So just having it like that means that you will only be able to battle with people that bring like all of their stuff. Like a single cat walking in is just going to get popped. But you're also cautious of using your cards very effectively. And then we have Evening. So Evening is where we come back to the constellation cards. So first step, check to see if any of your constellations align with your blockades, and then score them by removing them from the deck and placing them on your board. And then step 2, you'll put your hand of constellations on the bottom of the deck and then draw 3 to replace them. So if you don't score any, you'll get a whole new hand of 3, and it's like it slowly rotates through the deck. But we're going to go back for a second. I'm going to show you how to score a constellation with the example set up from the start. So this is what scoring a constellation would look like, where you could possibly have more than this, but you would need to rule a fox and mouse clearing with a blockade between them to meet the first condition on the card. And the same goes, but it's rabbit fox for the second one, and then any rabbit clearing that is like not already an existing rabbit clearing. This one, the fox ones, can overlap because it's for the blockade, but the second one on its own can't overlap with something. And so you've got 2 blockades and then 1 separate clearing. So you can rule a location with like as little as 1 owl if there's no one else there. And then in the constellation phase, when you look at the card, you go, okay, this is what I need. Bam, I score the card. That constellation card is added to your board. You would like tuck it in under the top. And then as you add more constellation cards, you can draw more cards. And that's what we're going to get to now. This is the scoring part. This is the other sections that you would find on the board as a reminder on how things kind of work. So a constellation configuration like this scores if you have a blockade between a fox and mouse clearing that you rule both of, and the same for rabbit fox and a single rabbit clearing. This is what we just went through. But then also constellation scoring. So scoring a constellation is 2 victory points per constellation. My little graphic is missing a bit. That's okay. And so you would have every single one that you would score, you would get 2 victory points. But they would be, all of them would be unique. So the one that you start off with, you would have to cycle through the entire deck again to be able to go and score that one. And then every second constellation that you add to your board, you would be drawing extra cards. And the blockades, every extra blockade you would add more victory points. And so that's kind of the idea. Come back to the setup. That's kind of the idea, is that the owls want to take and hold a location and then try and move along to take and hold the next location, and then try and like very slowly and like lock things down as much as they can. Because they don't, like, they only really have to have one guy there ruling, and then if they can put a blockade on the other spot, then people won't be able to come into where that little guy is. So you're like trying to take and hold an area that has the maximum number of combinations to be able to score as many constellations as you can when it happens. Because you'll have a hand of 3. You could score up to 3 per turn. And I thought that would be a really interesting way to interact with the game so far. We don't have anything that sits on paths so far as I've played with the game so far. And I thought that this unique scoring mechanism based on the configuration of where your things are placed, making a pattern, would also be super interesting, because you have to align your strategy, like where all the guys are that I'm fighting, and also what's the pattern for the things I'm trying to end up with at the end of the turn. So I thought that would be something cool. This is not something that I'm going to go and make a whole actual physical prototype for. This was just kind of a thought exercise, because I like to play around with these kind of things to help keep my design skills sharp, so to say, where you play something, you understand it, what parts of it make it good, what parts of it are required to make it function, and if I can make something that works alongside that, then in theory I could make a game in that category, or I can make a game with that same kind of things that made that thing good or whatever. It comes down to growing the understanding of how different popular and successful games work, and the things that go into them that make them good, so that when you are working on something similar, or you're in a situation where you've built something and you're like, what do I need to put into this place? What do I need to put this together? Then you go, oh, actually, this game that I played has this thing, and then you're borrowing from here to fix these little problems here and there and stuff like that. Which is, kind of standard practice for a lot of game design. A lot of games overlap mechanically with other different things. And this is kind of the stuff that I do on the regular, thinking about stuff, putting stuff together, getting ideas for games in the future. And if you thought this was interesting, if you think this is a faction that you would play, you think was, you would want to try out, let me know in the comments. Or if you think things need change or it's completely broken or whatever, let me know, because playtesting is collaborative. We work together to make sure that it actually does work. No designer goes, here's my idea, and then they, you buy it off a shelf immediately. There's a lot that goes into making sure it works. But I have a lot of other stuff on my channel that is like this, where I'm building stuff. Like I did a series of videos where I make custom Marvel Snap cards. I've got a whole bunch of other stuff where I prototype other things and try out, like a God of Game Design type stuff. So if you're interested in any of that, go and check that out. But I also have like a lot of just kind of gameplay stuff of Pokemon TCG, Magic the Gathering, and Marvel Snap. And I'm also doing a Kickstarter soon for my Reverse Murder Mystery game. You can see the poster on the wall behind me. And I have a lot of content that went into building that game and how we're going towards the Kickstarter and all the stuff that's coming together for that. So if you're interested in any of that, go and check that out on the channel. I'll have some buttons up over here for you to click on, some stuff. But also, while you're clicking on those buttons, click on the like and subscribe button, because clicking on all those buttons helps me out a lot. And also check out the description and go check out the Reverse Murder Mystery Kickstarter, because that would also help me out a lot. But also, you get a game too. You can't lose. Sounds great.